Good morning, children. This is the second part of your lesson, The Enemy. In the first part, we discussed the early childhood of Dr. Sadavo and his father's aspirations, his father's concerns about Dr. Sadavo's education and sending him to America, and he became a medical professional. And the first section also deals with Dr. Sadavo's meeting with Hannah at an American professor's house. And when we come to the live part of the story, we reached at a point where Dr. Sadavo and Hannah, while they were standing just the backyard of their house one evening, they saw a man coming out of the seas. As they see the man coming out of the seas, they rushed towards him. The rest of the story we can study now. Let us go. A black image that coming out from that flung out from the seas. Who is that? Hannah cried. She dropped Sadavo's arm and they both leaned over the railing of the veranda. Now they saw him again. The man was on his hands and his knees crawling. They noticed him. The man was crawling in the beach. Then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. Then they saw that the man was falling on his face and lying there. A fisherman, perhaps, Sadavo said, washed from his boat. First, Dr. Sadavo thought that it would be a fisherman. He was washed from his boat while he was fishing in the seas. He ran quickly down the steps and behind him Hannah came, her wide sleeve flying as she was running. A mile or two away on either side there were fishing villages. On either side of the Dr. Sadavo's house, a mile away, there were fishing villages. But there was only the bare and lonely coast. But in Dr. Sadavo's house and that area, we could see only the lonely coast, dangerous with the rocks. Surf beyond the beach was spikes with the rocks. We can see spikes of rocks on the seashores, on the beach. So it was not suitable for fishing. And sometimes man had managed to come through them. He must be badly torn. Dangerous with the rocks. The surf beyond the beach was spiked with rocks. Somehow the man had managed to come through them. This injured man could have managed to come through these spiked rocks, and he must be badly torn. The next paragraph. They saw when they came toward him that indeed it was so. The sand on one side of him had already stain of red soaking through. When they reached near the man, they saw the sand. It was soaked with blood. He is wounded, Sadavo exclaimed. He made haste to the man who lay motionless, his face in the sand. An old cap stuck to his head, soaked with seawater. He was in wet rags of garments. Sadavo stopped Hannah at his side and turned the man's head. They saw the face. Then they went near the man and turned his face towards them. His clothes were rags and a cap stuck to his head that was soaked with seawater. And when he turned his face, Hannah whispered, "A white man." Yes, it was a white man. The wet cap fell away and there was his wet yellow hair. Yes, this man with yellow hair, a blonde hair, long, as though for many weeks it had not been cut. For many weeks his hair had not been cut properly. And upon his young and tortured face, his face was so torturing signs we can see from his face was a rough yellow beard. This man had a rough yellow beard also. He was unconscious. He had no conscience in him and knew nothing that they did for him. What these people were doing for him, he couldn't understand because he was unconscious. He was lying there dead. Look at the next paragraph. Now Sadavo remembered the wound, and with his expert fingers he began to search for it. He inspected the wound because he had an expert hand. Blood flowed freshly at his touch. When he touched the wound, blood began to flow freshly at his touch. On the right side of his lower back, Sadavo saw that a gun wound had been reopened. Just lower back of him, a gun wound was reopened, he noticed. The flesh was blackened with powder, the powder from the bullet. The flesh was blackened already. Sometimes, not many days ago, the man had been shot and had not been tended. Yes, this man had that shot sometimes some days back, and it was not tended, not treated till date. It was bad chance that the rock had struck the wound. So now the rock had wounded again or reopened the wound again. Oh, how he is bleeding, Hannah whispered again in a solemn voice. The mist screened them now completely. Now the area was covered with mist. Nobody could see them. And at this time of the day, no one came by. The fishermen had gone home, and even the chance of beachcombers. Beachcombers means the people who came at the end of the beach time for picking up or the waste materials from the beaches. Even those people were away from the beach because it was the time of mist. Darkness spread everywhere. So everyone went back their homes. Look at that. What shall we do with this man? Sadavo muttered. But his trained hand seemed of their own will. What to do with this man? That was his thought. But his trained hands, they were searching for something around there to stop this bleeding. To bleeding, what they could do to stanch the fearful bleeding. To stanch means to stop the fearful bleeding. He packed the wound with the sea moss. Immediately he found the sea moss there. He packed the wound with the sea moss that strewed the beach. That strewed means that is scattered over the beach. The man mourned with a pain in his stupor. Stupor means he was a reduced consciousness somewhere in the inner mind, but he did not awaken. When Dr. Sadavo pressed the moss on his wound, he groaned a little bit. Look at the next paragraph. The best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea, Sadavo said. The best thing would be let him send back to the sea, Sadavo said. He was answering himself. Now that the bleeding was stopped for the moment, he stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. As he did with the moss, the bleeding stopped. Then he stood up and removed sands from his hands. Yes, undoubtedly, that would be the best, Hannah said steadily. Hannah supported him. That would be the best thing. Send him back to the sea. But she continued to stare down at the motionless man. But he couldn't do it, even though she said like it. She did not want it. She did not mean it. If we sheltered a white man in our house, we should be arrested. And if we turned him over as a prisoner, he would certainly die, Sadao said. This was the situation. If they did not take him back to their home and treated him, he would die. And if he would be handed over to the police, then also they would kill him. This was the situation. The kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea, Hannah said, but neither of them moved. So the best thing is put him back into the sea. Both of them agreed, but they couldn't move. They were staring with a curious repulsion. Repulsion means a dislike, a hostility, because they did not want to see a white man, an American, in their soil. They looked him with a repulsion, dislike upon the inert figure. Inert figure means that was unable to move. He was lying there like lifeless body. What is he? Hannah whispered. There is something about him that looks American. Then Dr. Sadao said, he looks an American. Sadao said, he took up the battered cap. Immediately he took up the battered cap. Battered here means rough conditioned, the beaten up cap he took from the soil. Yes, there, almost gone, was the faint lettering, a sailor. Dr. Sadao identified him. He was a sailor. He said, from an American warship. He spelled it out, U.S. Navy. The man was a prisoner of war. So they identified who he was. He was a POW, prisoner of war, from an American warship. He was wounded at his back, a gun wound in the back. So he has escaped. Hannah cried softly. And that is why he is wounded. Oh, which means he was an escaped prisoner. That was why he was wounded. Then as a support, Sadao said, in the back. Yes, while he was escaping, he was shot in the back. They hesitated, looking at each other. Then Hannah said with resolution, come, are we able to put him back into the sea? Then they asked each other, are they able to put this man back to the sea? If I am able, are you? Sadao asked. If I am ready to put this man back to sea, are you ready, Hannah? He asked his wife. No, Hannah said. But if you can do it alone, then she stopped it. Sadao hesitated again. That is his dilemma. What to do with this injured young American Navy officer? That was his dilemma. Whether he wanted to put this man back to life or let him to die. The strange thing is, he said, that if the man were whole, I could turn him over to the police without difficulty. So Dr. Sadao's opinion was that if this man was whole, which means he was healthy, he had no hesitation to hand over him to the police. I care nothing for him. He is my enemy. Because he is my enemy, he is an American. Now Japan was in war with America, so he was his enemy. All Americans are my enemy, and he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is. Then he was commenting on his face, the American face. But since he is wounded, but somewhere we can see the sympathetic mind of Dr. Sadao. as the young soldier was wounded, he started sympathizing with the man. Look at the next paragraph. You also cannot throw him back to the sea, Hannah said. Then there is only one thing to do. We must carry him into the house. So the only thing now they could do was carry this man back to their house and treat him. But the servant Sadao inquired, if they put this man back into their house, what could be the reaction of their servants? Dr. Sadao asked Hannah. We must simply tell them that we intend to give him to the police. Then Hannah gave a reply that their intention was only this. After treating this man, they would hand over this man to the police. That's all. And indeed we must, Sadao, we must think of the children and your position. And they must consider their children's future and the position of Dr. Sadao. Then it would endanger all of us if we did not give this man over a prisoner of war. And that would be endanger their life, because they are afraid of the rule. They are afraid of the rule of the land. Giving shelter to a POW is a traitorous act, a sedition, a civil disorder against the state. So giving shelter to a prisoner of war is a criminal charge. So it would affect his position and the future of the children and his entire life. So these people were in a great trouble if the authority found that they were treating a prisoner of war in their house without the permission of the government. Look at the next paragraph. Certainly, Sadao agreed. I would not think of doing anything else. Then finally, Dr. Sadao also agreed that this was the only thing they could do. Thus agreed, together they lifted the man. He was very light, like a fowl. Fowl means like a bird. He was so weightless that he had been half starved for a long time, because for many days he was starving. So his weight was reduced. He was just like a bird until it is only feathers and skeleton. So his arms hanging, they carried him up the steps and into the side door of the house. This door opened into a passage, and down the passage they carried the man towards an empty bedroom. It had been the bedroom of Sadao's father, and since his death it had not been used. So they carried this man into the bedroom of Dr. Sadao's father's. After his death, nobody used this bedroom. They put him back to this bedroom and laid there. They laid the man on the deeply matted floor. Everything here had been Japanese to please the old man, who would never in his own home sit on a chair or sleep in a foreign bed. Hannah went to the wall cupboards and slid back a door and took out a soft quilt. Then a little bit about the room. His father used to sit on the floor. He never sat down in any cushioned chair or any foreign furniture. And he was a true patriot. And meanwhile, Hannah went to the wall cupboard and opened it and took out a quilt, a bed covering. She hesitated. The quilt was covered with flowered silk, and the lining was pure white silk. He is so dirty, she murmured in distress. This man was seen so dirty. Yes, he had better be washed, Sadavo agreed. If you will fetch hot water, I will wash him. The man was so dirty, so they wanted to wash him. Dr. Sadavo put the idea that if she would bring hot water, he would do the washing job. But she said, I cannot bear for you to touch him, she said. We shall have to tell the servants he is here. I will tell Yumi now. She can leave the children for a few minutes and she can wash him. So immediately Hannah told Dr. Sadavo that better we would convey this message to the servants. They would do it. They would wash this man and she will look after the children for a few minutes, because she wanted to send Yumi to here. Sadavo considered a moment. Let it be so, he agreed. You tell Yumi and I will tell the others. So both agreed. Hannah wanted to tell this to Yumi and Dr. Sadavo would tell this to the cook and the gardener. They agreed and went away from the room. But the utter pallor of the man's unconscious face moved him first to stoop and feel his pulse. But when he saw the pallor face, the discolored face of the pale face of the young soldier, he sat down there and put his hand and checked his pulse. It was faint, but it was there. Yes, his pulse was so faint, but still he could feel it. He put his hand against the man's cold breast. The heart too was yet alive. Then he felt the heart also. Yes, it was beating. He will die unless he is operated on. This was his condition. He would die if the operation was not conducted. Sadavo said, considering. The question is whether he will not die anyway. But the question is whether he will not die anyway. Whether he was saved or not, he would be died. By the hand of the police or by himself. Anyhow, he had to die. That was the condition with this man. But as a doctor, he couldn't let him die. Look at the next paragraph. Hannah cried out in fear, don't try to save him. What if he should leave? Then immediately Hannah also realized the situation. She cried out, don't save him, because what if he should leave? Even though he came back to life, what would be his future? He would be killed by the Japan police. With this, I would like to wind up the second part of your lesson, The Enemy. If you did not subscribe the channel, subscribe it and wait for the rest of the story.